One aspect of the autistic experience that I talk about all the time is sensory overload. And I talk about things like how potent smells really overwhelm me and overstimulate me. I talk about how I can't stand sudden loud sounds, or any loud sounds for that matter. I talk about like certain fabrics and certain textures that just like, ugh. I talk about how certain lighting and like bright overhead white lights, how they really overstimulate me. And I talk about a lot of the things that you would associate with our senses. But one thing that I don't really share about often, but we're just kind of thinking about just how much like information can overwhelm me too. And I think especially in the times that we're living in where we have access to so much information, it can feel really overwhelming at times. And then to add on top of that, as autistic people, the way we process information and the way we take in information, it just makes it like so much more overwhelming and so much more overstimulating. Now, the thing with information is I like to have information. I like to have a lot of information. And if there's something that I don't really know much about, I need to know about it. I need to have information about it. And while this can be a good thing, and this is one of the reasons why I do know a lot about a lot of things, when there's situations that might evoke a like really negative emotional response, or just like a really challenging emotional response within the body, or when there's something that is uncertain, this is where it seems to cause that overwhelm, that overstimulation, that sensory overload. And the feeling that I get is very similar to that of when I do have like a certain smell around me that is just like super distracting and very uncomfortable, or when I am in a room with like bright fluorescent lights, for example. And I have mentioned on here previously that one of my intentions is to like not check my phone first thing in the morning and to just be like very mindful of the news and the media that I'm consuming. And this has been like so helpful, like so helpful. If you've been like overwhelmed with everything that you're seeing in the news, if you're just overwhelmed like going on social media and stuff, maybe try being more mindful of how much time you're spending on these platforms, how much time you're spending just like consuming all of this information. Because I think just as humans in general, our nervous systems aren't meant to take in all of this, and our minds aren't meant to process all of this 24/7. Like, we have access to other parts of the world. We have access to things that are going on hundreds and thousands of miles away from us. And I don't think that just as humans in general, we should be exposed to all of this all the time. And then to add on top of that, being autistic and being already overwhelmed and then processing information differently, and oftentimes taking days or even weeks to fully process things, especially like emotionally heavy things, it is like so taxing on us and so taxing on our nervous systems. And it's like kind of like, for me, it's like finding the balance. So like I mentioned, I need information. Like, if I don't understand something, I'm instantly curious about it, and I need to learn everything about it until I can understand it and until I can be able to like explain it to someone, because that means that I do have a pretty good understanding of it. Now, the issue with this, and I'm just gonna think of like, just like the uncertainty of our future with so many things that are happening, this is where like the balance is hard to find, because there comes a point when you have so much information that it just like, it creates more questions, it creates more fear, and it creates more worry. And as someone who has like a tendency for like obsessive thinking styles and just like really like ruminating on things because I have an issue with the uncertainty, I think part of that is my autism, and part of that is also just being human. Like, I need to know some things for a certain fact, and the reality is that that's just not always possible, especially in a world that is always changing. And so I'm like trying to find the balance of where do I draw the line between getting enough information so that I'm educated and so that I'm aware and so that I'm able to convey what I know to other people in a proper and truthful way, versus this information is just overwhelming me. It's bombarding my brain. It's bombarding my nervous system. I feel anxious. I feel overwhelmed. I feel like I don't know how to like find a resolution in all of this. And I feel like more and more lately, within probably even like the past like 3 to 5 years, just with the advancement of technology and then just the changing nature of our society, this has been happening more and more because there are more things that are happening that are just like tragic and just like terrible things that are happening. And then there's also the things that are like the warnings, like I can think of an example like with the climate changing and like the warnings about that. Like, where is the line to be drawn between being educated on it, knowing enough about it, and then not constantly needing to do the research to like feel that, to like fulfilled. It's almost like an itch. Like there's like an itch that needs to be fulfilled, but when you keep feeding that itch with more anxiety giving information, the itch like comes back tenfold. And so I guess this is like also like kind of a technique to deal with like obsessive thinking and things like that. But I'm realizing now that I have to set limits with myself with how much information I consume, and depending on the topics. Now, if it's like a special interest of mine, I don't really set the limits with that, because that kind of information actually like, it brings me joy. It makes me feel happy. It makes me feel excited. It makes me feel passionate. But then like when there is like something tragic or like a terrible thing that's happening and I feel like I need to have more and more information on it to like, maybe for like a sense of safety or to try to soothe that anxiety, I'm realizing, okay, I can have like 5 minutes to read about this and then I need to put it down. And I really need to be firm with that boundary with myself, because I understand that if I don't put it down, if I keep consuming, it's like this vicious cycle, and eventually I will be burnt out. I will be overcome with sensory overload and overstimulation. And so I thought I would share this with you today, because I feel like there are some people who can relate, whether you're autistic or not, because again, I think just as humans, we aren't meant to be consuming all this information. And then if you are autistic, our nervous systems are pretty much already dysregulated. So to add more dysregulating things on top of that, I feel like it's going to cause burnout. It's going to cause exhaustion. It's going to cause fatigue. It's going to cause like a shutdown or a meltdown. And all those things that I just said are things that happen to me if I do get too overwhelmed with any sort of sensory overload. And also if I do get overwhelmed with any sort of like information overload. So how do I resolve this? I think the key for me, and maybe it's something that will help you too, is just by being really clear at first with what the boundary is. So for me, it's like, okay, I need to set a 5-minute timer. I can read about this thing. I can learn more about it. But after that timer goes off, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. And even though there's like that itch that wants to go down that rabbit hole as like a false sense of security, the more I read about this, the more I learn about this, it's just going to cause me more anxiety, and it's not actually going to help me find a resolution. And also what I'm realizing too is that the resolution for a lot of uncertain things, it actually comes when we're not focused on that problem. It comes when we're doing the things that we love, when we can be out here in nature and just like find ways to ground ourselves. That's when those solutions and resolutions come. And so maybe just try to remember that too. If you're having a really hard time with when that timer goes off, to like step away from it. And maybe, just maybe, that's something that will help give you a little bit more capacity for the times that we're living in. I think it's really important that we first find a clear boundary that we can set with ourselves. So for me, it's going to be 5 minutes when reading any sort of like news or anything that I'm doing research on that I might be anxious about, that might where I might feel that anxious itch that needs to be scratched, but I can recognize that by scratching it, it's just going to perpetuate that anxiety. So a 5-minute timer with that's step one. And then step two is being very, very firm with that boundary and understanding that even though I have that itch that really wants me to read more and try to find a solution, I know that if I keep deep diving down that rabbit hole on this topic, whatever it may be, it's only going to lead to more anxiety. It's only going to lead to more confusion and more overwhelm.